What I would like to speak about is connected with gender equality, or gender parity, from a global perspective. And I come to you with having worked for 30 years, more than 30 years, with global organizations and specifically with attention to women's lives in many countries. And what I have noticed is that over the past decades, gender equality has evolved steadily, and women have made unprecedented gains in their rights, education and health, and access to employment and livelihoods. Although many women continue to struggle with gender-based disadvantages in their daily lives, things have changed for the better for many women. Progress, however, has not come easily, and it has not come evenly to all countries or to all women, or even across dimensions of gender equality. In fact, the current pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic crisis, has and will reverse many of the gains that women have made. And that's why the UN Secretary General today has said that gender equality is the greatest human rights challenge of our time, because it forces us to look at home, in the economy, in society, and we find that women lack equal access and opportunities in all of these areas, and COVID has only made it worse. Additionally, COVID has exacerbated the visibility of gender-based violence. And so we know that what we thought was progress over years, we will have to look at it from a different perspective. Before COVID, it had been said by researchers that it would take 257 years to gain gender equality if things moved at the speed at which they were going. But COVID even threatens this to be unimaginable, because we have seen and continue to see the devastating consequences that the pandemic has on women and girls across every sphere, from health and the economy to security and social protection. But today, I want to share some of my experiences that actually say lack of gender equality in the society is not new. So how do I qualify my past statement that progress had been made? I want to refer to 3 areas where I think that progress had been made in my lifetime. One is many women had a lot of freedom to be able to go to the public workspace, enabled by 50 years ago, nearly 55 years ago, we had the discovery of the pill. And the pill freed women, or contraceptives freed women, to go to the public place. Second, in my lifetime, gender-based violence became a public debate that could be addressed in the churches, in the parliaments, at the United Nations. So it moved from the private space to the public space, and it did so because women organized and spoke about it and realized that it was not an isolated happening to women of a particular place, but it was found everywhere in the world. And today, as I speak to you, gender-based violence is still present in every country. There's no country in the world where gender-based violence has been eradicated, leave alone where we have 100% or 50% equality of men and women. And then the third part of what I have seen as one who comes from faith perspective and has worked a lot in ecumenical movements, in faith institutions, and also in secular world, is the presence of a significant number of women in leadership positions, so that we are beginning to see and learn from the changes and the styles that women bring to the table of leadership, even as we see that women are not sufficiently represented in leadership positions. Currently, as we go through the COVID, I think many media places and houses have brought to our attention the progress that has been made with those countries where women have provided strong leadership, including a number of Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, etc., in regards to COVID. So in my lifetime, I can be able to speak to the fact that when women come to the decision-making tables and provide governance together with men, there is a difference in that governance, and we can get good things coming out of governance. However, in the last few years of our work, we have seen rising conservatism, fundamentalism, and regressive governments and religious institutions make these fragile achievements moments for women and girls rare and scarce. Alarmingly, actions that attempt to usurp women's hard-won rights and their choices exist today. Civil society organizations that advance women's hard-won rights and their choices have seen their space and their reach being limited to a very, very large extent, and have spoken to the closing space for freedoms. These have not only come from women's rights organizing, but from human rights organizing across. And here, when fundamentalism and religious conservatism is mentioned, those gathered here in this forum have a responsibility to listen and understand what is going on. From the women's rights organizing across the world, we have had women talk to having attacks on their organizing itself. They have had attacks on the issues that they have worked so hard being reversed. For example, many countries pointed out to the age of marriage for girls, which had sometimes been achieved by law to 17, 18 years, being reversed back to 12 years and 13 years as an example of where we talk about reversing of the gains that women have got. And then quite a strong attack on the reproductive health and reproductive rights of women by religious institutions and by religious leaders. Specifically, the area of the reproductive health and reproductive rights of women is one that should raise concerns to anybody who is concerned about how religions and how religious leadership impacts or regresses the rights that women have achieved. And this is an area that I think we need over and again to revisit and know that when rights of reproductive health are found for women, it's not just about rights for those particular women, but the changes and the health that they achieve individually impacts on the lives of the whole society, as it were. We know that women who can make a choice and space their children have ability to be mothers to those children that are alive. We know that women who have access to reproductive technologies, such as contraceptives, do have the possibility to make choices in the professions that they take and to sustain those choices. We know that when women have got access to their reproductive rights, it also means that they are able to remain not only healthy, but also to participate effectively in decision making. So reproductive health and rights is a justice issue, and it goes beyond single political issues or personal decisions. They encompass issues that women face throughout their whole lives, including sexual education, sexuality, family planning, but they also point out in the life cycles that women go through throughout their whole life. None of us can make decisions about reproductive health, rights, and justice issues in isolation. They are actually influenced by the context in which women find themselves. They are influenced by religions, by culture, by the education that women have. And this is an area where I think much of the fundamentalism that is pointed out by the women comes from. So one might ask, what exactly could religious organizations do to ensure that there is not a regress on the fundamental rights that women have achieved? I believe that there are 4 things that are really important to be done. One is to recognize, name, and root out violence sources wherever it's happening. When churches and religious institutions see attack on women of any type, whether it's psychological attack or physical attack, as something that should be addressed, and address it from the root causes and name it as it is, that is a recognition and the support that women need everywhere. And I think religious organizations can ensure that they care and create safe communities that foster conversations, that foster deeper understanding for what gender parity looks like, so that these issues of gender equality are not seen as issues of a la mode, issues of passion, issues that only happen from time to time and that people align to them because it's popular to do so, but really see that this is issues of what our core existence, what diversity and inclusion, what differences and possibilities that we hold together as men and women, where they can be encouraged to thrive and to help us be better at what we do together in management, in governance, in caring for families, and in caring for the environment. So I think that the religious institutions can also provide the actual details of the education that is needed for people to understand what gender violence is about, what gender-based violence is about, how it is, how it impacts communities, and really understand and help people to understand the dynamics of power that actually enable people to practice gender-based violence in communities and in families at large. And I think that religious institutions can create or can become accountable themselves and can create a way of tracking accountability to avoid all of this gender-based violence that we have seen in the society. There are things that arise, gender-based violence, that is enabled by institutions, by religious institutions themselves or the religious practices. One is in the area of how religious scripts are interpreted. And that is an old age factor that has been talked about for years on end. How institutions like churches continue to help people to reinterpret the scriptures from the times that they have been received a long time ago into interpreting the scriptures in a different way today is really important. And this can be enhanced by the fact that we are at an age in life where we have seen the impact of different ways of reading scriptures, of reading the Bible, of giving hermeneutics to the interpretation of the scriptures in such a way that we can bring the full humanity of all persons. And this has to be deepened and renewed from time to time. In the years that I spent in the ecumenical world, I was privileged to have seen from country to country what an act of solidarity between religious or between the churches can mean. So for example, when Lutheran churches decided that ordination of women in the Lutheran church was okay, how that impacted from country to country. I saw within 1 year, Finland, for example, ordaining 40 women, and Namibia, which had a relationship with Finland, taking it on and doing something of a similar case. And we saw as church after church in the Lutheran Communion continued through their communication within the Lutheran World Federation, through the collaboration, to really see that ordaining of women is a good thing for the church, it's a good thing for the women, it's a good thing for our faith. And such a thing can also happen in other areas where we want to see parity between men and women. The other area that I want to bring where I can see that a lot of difference can be made and churches can be part of it is in my work that I have done, especially recently through the Global Fund for Women, where the reach was to a very, throughout the whole world, where we supported women-led organizations in more than 175 countries. We would see what giving that space for women organizing and speaking for themselves is an important part. And I feel like religious spaces and specifically church institutions can create that space where they fund and give space to women organizing. There is a lot of organizing that happens within the churches, but very often, very little budgets that are attributed to those women's desks and women's movements within the church itself. And I think that I learned by being in funding agencies that when you are able to devote some, not only the strategy that will bring women to the top, but also fund it, a big difference can be made. And I urge that the churches would be able to bring that. I saw when, for example, we funded organizations to increase their ability to respond to immediate needs of grassroots women, which sometimes these needs were connected with the erosion of rights. Sometimes they were to support the growth of movements that would ensure that specific place-based violences are addressed within that place. So, for example, ensuring that people who are on the move, like refugees, displaced people, that there is a specific attention that is given to gender, because even when there's violence or conflicts appearing in a particular place, women experience those conflicts differently. And when the churches or other organized institutions can see these gender-based differences and pay attention to them, that is one of the areas where I think that there can be a lot of support that comes specifically from religious institutions. And I want to say another area where I see that the religious institutions can support the protocols that have been accepted throughout the whole world through the Sustainable Development Goals by giving them a religious touch, because one of the importance of the faith-based institutions is that they often are rooted in communities and they stay in those communities for a very long time. When you are doing a sustainable development work, meaning sustainable, it requires long-term stay where trust is built and where you can go today and tomorrow and check to see the differences that you are making, rather than the plight of people going to do some pilot projects here and there, which is how the development work works. But if institutions, religious institutions that are rooted in community can really take their work seriously and gender parity seriously, because they are rooted in communities, because 80% of the world say that they are affiliated to some faith or other, then indeed we will see much more progress that is made in all of the areas where women's progress is threatened or where safety for women is threatened. And the third thing that I think can be really important is when religious institutions can make taboo subjects or subjects that have been rendered taboo discussed in the public. Rape is an example. In many of our communities throughout the world, especially when people are vulnerable, the rape of women is extremely common, and religious institutions have refused or refuse to put front center conversations about sex, about violent sex, about there is no teaching about healthy kind of sex and sexuality, so that people can be able to have the freedom to speak freely in these spaces as well. Because I think it's only when we are able to bring all matters of things that we call violent or unfair or unjust to the discussion table, to the public place, And the religious institutions really do have a responsibility to bring these things to the table, because women's organizing and women's organizations have done so. They have paved the way. They have opened the Pandora box. But I think it's still a long way for us to see the religious institutions embrace them and take them to the next level by normalizing them in society. And I can say that this can happen because if we take one issue, which is the menstruation of girls, many women's organizations and people in education have pointed out how girls could not go to school because they did not have menstrual pads. And people could not talk about it. But today, if you go into many countries, including my own Kenya country, you will see that media and women and governments have begun to sanitize this by bringing that conversation into the public space. Boys and girls are talking about it. Girls are proud that they can be able to menstruate, and what they need is menstrual care, not the shame that makes them not go to school. And so girls are able to embrace this and then to look for what they need and to retain their place in school and to make a difference. These are the kind of things that I'm expecting religious institutions to do more of and churches to do more of, because they are not doing enough. And to create safe spaces for conversations, harder conversations to take place, so that when there's difference of opinions, it would still be a place of hope to build a consensus, but also to push hard on justice and the right thing to do, even when consensus is not able to achieve those. I believe this is a possibility to be done in church spaces such as the one that is we are in today, because I believe that the Christian faith is a faith of radical hope. And I believe that it is radical because it is grounded in an act of raising Jesus from the dead, and that is doing a new thing and doing a radical thing. And I do believe that if we believe in resurrection for the Christian as a victory over death, we can push this further and find a victory that brings safety, security, and hope for women. As I often quote the German theologian Jürgen Morton, who said that hope is the distinctive contribution of Christian faith to our world in the midst of ambiguous and even hopeless circumstances that plague human existence. So if this is what distinguishes us from other religious groups, then we need to use it and claim it and be able to show that we can show a difference by bringing relief to women, and especially in addressing gender-based violence, both from a religious perspective and from a social perspective, because gender-based violence is not just something that happens there, it's something that happens to people. And when you think of gender-based violence, put a face to it. Thank you.